concern about him being able to do this long term for about a year now.
Wow.
Because he's been managing this pain. But it hasn't been this bad. It has been manageable. It got worse on him. It flared up on him over the last week, and it really took him downhill very quickly. Nobody saw this coming, not his doctors, not Steve. And so he wouldn't have flown to Portland, for example, if he knew it was going to be this bad. It got worse after he got there. So there is a hope, from what I understand, with his doctors and with Steve, that he might be able to get past this current flare-up and come back and coach. I think that is what they're all hoping to have. But it is a serious threat to his coaching future, and unfortunately, it has been for some time.
Those Warriors swept the Blazers in the first-round series after a 25-point blowout win in Portland last night, and the Dubs did this without head coach Steve Kerr, who missed the game because of symptoms related to back surgery. Golden State outscoring 45 points in the first quarter and led by 24 at the half. Stephen A., does this prove that coaching in the NBA is overrated?
Well, it can be overrated when you have surreal talent like the Golden State Warriors have. That's not to poo-poo Steve Kerr in any way, because the culture that he's helped establish and build in Golden State, that Mark Jackson established to some degree and then he ultimately took to another level, he deserves a boatload of credit for it. So in the case of the Golden State Warriors, I don't think that coaching at this particular juncture is that pivotal. By and large, however, coaching is desperately needed. It's a required, it's a required position to be fulfilled because a lot goes into it for dudes who know how to do it and do it well. But once you've successfully established a culture and the players are on the same page and everyone knows what's required of them, and more importantly, they know what to do, then that changes things significantly, and that's the way to look at it. Coaching is not that important at this particular juncture with Golden State, but it's because of the culture in combination with the talent that they have. Most other places, coaching would be very, very pivotal. But the fact that it's not that pivotal in Golden State is not a knock on Steve Kerr. A matter of fact, it's a testament to him because of what he's already built and established culture-wise.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. I mean, I agree with the part that he doesn't need to be there for them to win. I agree with the idea that coaching in basketball is not as important as, say, coaching in the NFL. Like, the NBA is more because there are fewer pieces on the floor, and you can run all your plays through your best players if you so choose. It is, it is more determined by the talent you have than, say, baseball is or football is. I agree with that. But love me some Mark Jackson. The talk about the culture that was established with Golden State under Mark Jackson, which has been described by some as paranoid. I was not there, and I'm a big Mark Jackson fan since I was a kid watching the Knicks. I'm not saying that is or isn't true, but that's what was reported and discussed, versus the culture established by Steve Kerr is different. And the strategy used is somewhat different. Steve Kerr is credited with refining the strategy. So the idea that Mark Jackson took them to a very good place, and had he been left alone, he'd have won a championship with Golden State, maybe. But we know that Steve Kerr did. And so it's not just, well, so on the one hand, yes, you have culture, and maybe there was a change between Mark Jackson and Steve Kerr. But you also have things that maybe you can say fall under the idea of culture, but certainly aren't in-game decisions. In other words, just because Steve Kerr isn't there on the bench or on the sidelines making in-game decisions doesn't mean that coaching isn't important. Coaching is very important. It's just that's only one component of it. In-game decisions are one component, but coming up with a game plan, strategy, how you run your practices, how you establish team chemistry and lead in that way, the basic way you're going to use your pieces, that's all coaching. The preparation is all coaching. And then in-game decisions are something else. I'll give you an example. Scotty Brooks is rightly credited with being good at a lot of what I just mentioned, but not always with in-game decisions in the playoffs, for example. Does that mean he's a good coach or a bad coach? Steve Kerr, even if he's not there and the Warriors do win a championship, yes, he didn't make in-game decisions, and he won't get as much credit as a coach who was there for the whole ride and made those decisions. But the preparations, the strategy, the chemistry, all those things are very much a part of coaching, and I think Steve Kerr deserves enormous credit. To me, the Warriors, just look at the way they play defense, Stephen A. They don't have to play defense that way. They are coached up, they are prepared, and they are existing, as you mentioned, within a culture that fosters all of that, and Kerr deserves enormous credit for it.
So what you're saying is you agree with me?
I agree with some of what you said, but
That's
I
cute.
took it
It
to
sounded
a
like
deeper,
all.
more profound level.
It sounded like more. So you took it to a deeper,
Yes.
more
It's the Ivy
profound
League
level,
version.
even though it was totally unnecessary.
No, no, it wasn't totally unnecessary.
Okay,
No, it wasn't
I understand.
totally
I
unnecessary.
understand.
The
Yes,
fine
and I
point is
understand.
just because the guy isn't making in-game decisions doesn't mean he's not coaching. Coaching is more than in-game decisions. That's the point. That's the
understand.
fine point.
I've written it down.
Excellent.
You guys, what head coach do you feel like deserves more love from this past season that hasn't gotten it?
Honestly speaking, I think that it's the combination of Mike D'Antoni,
Yep.
Brad Stevens. Eric Spoelstra did an outstanding job too in Miami. He really, really did.
I got to tell you,
Those
I think
names
it's
come out to
Fizdale.
mind.
I mean, you look at not
Of course,
just his
Fizdale. You're
performance
right. You're right about Fizdale.
D'Antoni's gotten a lot of credit. Brad Stevens, everyone knows, is one of the bright lights, especially among young coaches. And Spoelstra, if people don't know, they should know by now. Look at the Heat for extended stretches. It was like, oh, look at the Heat without all those guys. Look at the Heat.
Well,
but Fizdale, I think, deserves real credit for Memphis right now, and they've knotted up the series with the Spurs.
Well, but that's why he deserves the credit, because the season was relatively average, indicative of what Memphis was capable of. But to come back 0-2 and to notch the series and to have them playing the way that they're playing, it reminds you of the days that Lionel Hollins was coaching this team and how rough and rugged they could be, even though it wasn't against San Antonio, because they got swept by San Antonio. But again, but Fizdale definitely deserves credit as well. You're right. It's from that Miami tree.
Yep, and he doesn't get all the credit because he came to a team where Mike Conley and others, but especially Conley, lead in terms of the culture there. And so when you have a guy like Conley and the culture already established, people will tend to take credit away from the coach. But look at that pivotal moment after Game 2 when the refs really were, there was a tremendous disparity in terms of the way fouls were called, really out of proportion to what was going on the floor. And he stood up for his guys and rallied them in precisely the way that a Mike Conley-led team would respond.
It's hard not to root for him, for sure. Gentlemen, let's leave it.